Good morning and thank you for joining us. It is fabulous to see such a big turnout and we're hoping you will stay for the entire course of the day or dip in and out as is appropriate for your research interests. I'd like to welcome our esteemed speakers, most of whom are here in person and one of whom is joining us online. And also a special welcome to Greg Fox, who is here in his very first SEAC event as Interim Director of Sydney Southeast Asia Centre. So it's wonderful to all be here together in the room. I don't want to take up too much of your time because we have wonderful experts to hear from, and we're kicking off with Indonesia. And I'm really delighted to welcome Navhat Nuraniyah, who is a PhD candidate at the Australian National University. Her research focuses on how Islamist opposition groups in Indonesia respond to political repression and its broader implications for democratic decline. She was previously an analyst at the Jakarta-based Institute for Policy Analysis of Conflict, where she worked on violent extremism. And prior to that, she was a researcher at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. So she's really experienced. I'm really looking forward to hearing from her. Navhat is going to be speaking to us for about 15 to 20 minutes, followed by which we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A. We do enforce our times quickly, so apologies if we can't get to all the questions, but there should be opportunity after the first session for you to approach Navhat directly if you still have some burning questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Navhat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for the kind and generous introduction, and thank you, Sydney Southeast Asia Centre, for having me. So I've been given 15 minutes to update you on all the political developments in Indonesia. No pressure at all. So I'm just going to focus on the presidential election. We can, of course, discuss about the legislative or other elections later on. Okay, so I'm turning on my timer, Natalie. Okay, so as you can see, well, you haven't seen yet. Okay, so this is my title for Indonesia's 2024 election: Sectarianism out, dynasty in, and democracy is still there, but just barely. Indonesia just held its presidential election on the 14th of February, the best thing to do on Valentine's Day, right? And the winner of the presidential election is the first one with 58.6%. I believe this is the highest number that any candidate has ever gotten, or maybe SBY. So the winner was Prabowo Subianto, the 72 years old former army general and son-in-law of former dictator Suharto. And of course, as you know, he's got a tainted human rights track record. For years, he was banned from traveling to the US. And his vice president is Gibran Rakabuming Raka, the son of the incumbent president Joko Widodo, or Jokowi. And interestingly, Jokowi and Prabowo, which is Gibran's father, used to be arch rivals in the past two elections, but then they made up in 2019. Jokowi, in a classic coalitionist move, recruited Prabowo as defense minister. This is like Trump recruiting Hillary Clinton as his defense minister. So there are three key issues that I will focus on today. First, how do we make sense of Prabowo's victory? I argue that part of the reason Prabowo won is because he's expanded his popularity by abandoning sectarianism and shifting to personalistic campaigning devoid of ideology. And more importantly, Jokowi's backing is crucial to explain his victory. And then we're going to evaluate Jokowi's legacy and imagine what kind of president Prabowo will be. So just a quick refresher, how the theme of the election has changed away from sectarianism. Back in 2016, who was also competing with Jokowi at the time, fashioned himself as a populist leader, kind of like Chavez or Thaksin. And his campaign platform was all about economic nationalism, saving Indonesia from exploitation by foreign powers, especially China. And Prabowo and his supporters propagated anti-China sentiment, spreading false rumors like in this tabloid and also on social media that Jokowi is actually a Chinese and a Christian. His name was Joko Oi, not Jokowi. and so from 2016 onwards, Prabowo kind of tweaked his campaign platform a bit from nationalist populism to sectarian populism. And he started working closely with intolerant Islamist groups like the Islamic Defenders Front or FPI. Here, all right, the head is Rizik Shihab. And FPI, as many of you will be familiar with, was responsible for leading the 2016 Islamist mobilization against Jakarta Governor Ahok, who was the first double minority to become the governor of the capital city. And the Islamists accused Ahok of religious blasphemy. He was prosecuted and he was thrown into jail for it, which marked the growing political cloud of Islamist groups. By 2019 presidential election, the Islamists were actively campaigning for Prabowo. They were portraying Prabowo as the savior who can save Indonesia from Jokowi's atheist and communist agenda. And he did come close to winning. So the result of that was that in 2019, we saw ethno-religious polarization in Indonesia, the kind of ethno-religious cleavages that we hadn't seen for a long time. So for instance, Jokowi won in the red provinces like eastern Indonesia, where the majority are non-Muslims, but also in central and east Java, where the Muslims are traditionalist or pluralist. Whereas Prabowo won in the yellow provinces, like Sumatra, West Java, South Sulawesi, where the Muslims tend to be more conservative. And then suddenly in 2023, we're bombarded with these images, right, of Prabowo now fashioning himself as an affable leader. So using this AI-generated image, and the new motto was "Gemoy," means cute or chubby, but for a baby, not for a grown-up. With this kind of, and he used a lot of TikTok and social media dances and dance challenge. And if you saw some of those videos, which I'm not gonna play today, you can check it out on YouTube. In some of these videos, it didn't really inform us what Prabowo's campaign platform is, what his policy agenda was going to be. It was all kind of just, having fun, singing and dancing. Thus, his social media strategy changed from disinformation to non-information. So why did Prabowo abandon sectarianism this time around? Well, first of all, in order to secure the support of Jokowi and his pluralist base, Prabowo needed to distance himself from Islamists. First of all, Jokowi government and his partner, the moderate Islamic group Nahdlatul Ulama, have effectively stigmatized conservative Islam. For example, in 2017, the government amended the law on mass organization, this law on mass organization basically provided a prerogative for the executive to ban any civil society group. Remember, not just Islamists, right? The law is general for any civil society groups that the government deemed dangerous to the state. Therefore, it was illiberal. And also the government applied mandatory nationalism screening tests for civil servant entry examination and also promotion. But because radicalism or radical Islam was very vaguely defined, often it targets pious Muslim civil servants who are simply critical towards Jokowi or the government, or who simply do not follow Nahdlatul Ulama religious scripts. And second of all, Prabowo understood that there was a polarization fatigue among the masses. As the Indonesian in the room would remember that the polarization back in 2015 really affected people's personal relationship. Children stopped talking to their parents, families, and so on. And so therefore the survey shows that the majority of the Indonesian population actually supported the dissolution of Islamist troublemakers such as Hizbut Tahrir and FPI. Although interestingly, the people did not punish the very politician who exploited this sectarian sentiment and these Islamist groups. And also the trend with this election is that there is a lot of new voters, young generation, Gen Z. So 60% of the voters are young people. And so Prabowo was harnessing, things like TikTok, which is the fastest growing social media in Indonesia, and influencer marketing. Of course, other candidates also used social media campaigning, also used TikTok, but Prabowo had has the most resources and funds to hire top celebrity influencers, such as the gentleman in white, Raffi Ahmad, and his family, who are these big influencers. They've got 75 million followers, which is almost a third of the population. And this celebrity also owns a company that manages other top influencers. Anyway, but I don't think that the Gemoy offensive was the only factor. I don't think it was the main factor, but it did help to boost Prabowo's likability among the young people. As you can see, the survey showed that his popularity among the youth kept increasing. The fact that sectarianism is no longer the dominant theme in this election doesn't mean the end of religion, because Prabowo is still working closely with Nahdlatul Ulama. He owed part of his victory in Java to NU. And then another factor, of course, is Jokowi himself. Jokowi has a very high approval rate, and Prabowo's popularity rose significantly after Jokowi's endorsement. But Jokowi didn't just rely on his popularity. He was relentlessly campaigning to avoid a runoff so that his son and Prabowo will win without going into second round. Because in Indonesian system, you need at least 51% of the popular vote to win. And Jokowi, as other experts have noted, did an unparalleled mobilization of state resources, giving a lot of social assistance at a scale that never been seen before. And also there's a lot of evidence of police intimidation of rival politicians. So village heads, mayors, or some of them were threatened by police that if they don't support Prabowo or at least be neutral, they would be charged with corruption cases. The survey showed a high correlation between support for Jokowi and Prabowo. This is an example of association of village head declaring support for Prabowo Gibran. So the question that's, I guess, in everyone's mind is, what kind of polity will Prabowo inherit from Jokowi, and how is he going to change it? A lot of democracy indices show that Indonesia's democracy has been steadily declining. As you can see, the graph, it's not extreme, it's not steep, but it is declining. And so what do I mean by democratic decline in Jokowi's era? Some of the examples, of course, is the eroding, how Jokowi eroded the power and independency of the Anti-Corruption Commission, or KPK. Jokowi was also seriously toying with idea of term extension, which is one of the sacred principles of Indonesian democracy, although he never said it himself. So he got his cabinet members and kind of close allies to say, oh, Jokowi is an amazing leader, why don't we extend his term? So he kept his hands clean in a way. And then the government also facilitated a partial re-centralization because the government basically postponed the regional election from 2022 to 2024, whereas many mayors and governors ended their term in 2022, which then gave the central government the prerogative to appoint over 200 regional heads. Some of them were police, army officers, and also people within Jokowi's close circle. Jokowi infamously silenced critical voices from civil society actors. There's been a lot of reports documented by human rights groups. And the government also ignored popular aspiration. But the smart thing is that they never totally stopped protests, student protests. No, they still allowed it, but they didn't listen to what the protesters had to say. So we had a very frustrated civil society. And another part of Jokowi's legacy is that he made the executive body much more powerful. So Jokowi, he formed a large coalition so that almost no opposition party existed, no significant opposition party during his term. He did it not only through inducement, but also coercion of other party elites. Jokowi also interfered in judiciary matters. This is the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court, Anwar Usman. He was a widower, and Jokowi arranged his marriage to his sister. So now he's got the Chief Justice, he's his brother-in-law. And then the Constitutional Court issued a ruling which changed the age limit for presidential and vice presidential candidates, allowing his 36 years old son, who according to the law was under the minimum age limit, to run as VP. So Jokowi consolidated his dynasty in a way that no other prior presidents managed to accomplish. They tried, of course, but even Suharto himself didn't accomplish that consolidating dynasty goal. So now his son is the VP. His other son, Kaisang, is apparently he's going to run, probably for Jakarta election maybe, but he's the head of one of the political parties. His son-in-law, Bobby, was the mayor of Medan. He's also running as the governor of North Sumatra. His daughter-in-law, even the private secretary of his wife, is also running as mayor. So there's a lot going on. But as I said before, like autocrats, Jokowi kept his hands clean. He got other people to do his bidding for him. He inspired his underlings to guess what he wants before he orders them. So for example, like the term limit and also the Jakarta Special Region Bill, which would abolish a direct election in Jakarta. And this bill was made because Indonesia is going to is already building a new capital city in Kalimantan. You can talk about it later in the discussion. But my point is that most of what Jokowi has done are not illegal per se. They probably fall in the gray area. And then another part of Jokowi's legacy is powerful police. So we know that in Indonesia, even in post-authoritarian after 1998, the military still retained a certain level of impunity. But under Jokowi, the police has also grown more powerful in addition to the military. So the best example for this was the Red-White Task Force, or Satgasus Merah Putih, which was formed in early 2017, initially to respond to the Islamist mobilization, right? So they were given unbridled authority. This was a shadow unit, so it was all secret. No one really knew about its existence initially. This task force was given unbridled authority and access to off-budget funds to deal with the complex political tasks, including repression of opposition activists, initially Islamists, but later on also expanded to other pro-democracy activists. The task force was dissolved in 2022 after a massive scandal blew out involving the head of the unit, who shot his own adjutant, whom he accused of cheating with his wife. Anyway, it turned into this big soap opera, which led to the dissolution of the unit. But the pattern of repression, But the pattern of repression has stayed, and it can be used by Prabowo later on. So what kind of president is Prabowo going to be when he knows that the system is already weaker now? What we know is that Prabowo is such a chameleon. So we've seen Prabowo, who is the strong man, the short-fused and irrational. His party, for example, was responsible for passing the law in 2014, which abolished direct regional elections. In 2019, Prabowo also denied the results of the election and mobilized his followers to go onto the street to instigate a deadly riots which killed 9 people and injured many others. On the other hand, we've seen the Gemoy Prabowo, who's flexible, pragmatic, and quite rational, reconciling with Jokowi and so on. So he often shows contradictory attitudes, and he's got all these tentacles reaching out to different places at the same time. For example, publicly, Prabowo distanced himself from Islamist groups, right? But my research shows that actually Prabowo still kept communication line with Islamists. And there are many other examples of this. What about his programmatic agenda? Well, it's not very clear, other than that he's going to give free lunches to school children. And there's this vague notion of continuity of Jokowi's policies. The most notable one is the building of the new capital city. So in conclusion, we've got new interesting pairing of president and VP. The president has serious questions around his health. The VP is a young heir of Jokowi, and their victory wouldn't have been possible without Jokowi's systematic mobilization of state resources and coercive tools, giving them an unfair advantage. And Jokowi's erosion of democracy was gradual, very carefully calculated, and almost imperceptible, right? To lay citizens. But nevertheless, his anointed successors will inherit an Indonesia that has much weaker institutions, civil liberties, and rule of law than ever before. And lastly, the compromised check and balances coupled with Prabowo's track record, volatility, and impending friction with Jokowi spell unpredictability and instability for Indonesia. Thank you.
Stay up here. Thank you. Fantastic. Wow, thank you so much, Nava. That was really fantastic. So much information and really comprehensive, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions in the audience. So we have about 10 minutes for questions, and we do have roving mics. Simon is here with the mic and Lydia is over here with the mic. So I would open it up to you. When you ask your question, could you please state your name, where you're from, like your institution if you have one, and please keep it to a question rather than a comment. If you want to have a comment, by all means come and have a chat with Nava during the break. But if you could put your hand up if you have a question. Fantastic, up the back, Elizabeth. And I might actually start, Nava, because I just wanted to ask you a question about foreign affairs and Prabowo's perspective on relationships within ASEAN and with the West as well, because I noted on one of your slides you were talking about this contradictory approach between authoritarianism and Gomoy, and in terms of his foreign policies, his attitude towards the West, you said there is this anti-West rhetoric coupled with pro-West gestures. So could you please speculate on what his foreign policies might look like? Thanks. And then we'll go to Elizabeth. Thank you.
I'm not the best to say about foreign policy.
That's why I said
but what I meant by that was that, Prabowo has shown some anti-Western rhetoric. He always said, the West, don't teach me about democracy, don't teach me about tolerance. And his speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue, which the Ukrainians called, it was a Russian plan. But anyway, on the other hand, his policies as defense minister, for example, some of his defense procurement, a lot of them was from the West, although I know that the reason is much more complicated than that, and he himself grew up in Switzerland, in all these former British colonies, so he's very westernized, very cosmopolitan, and people said that he's going to be more active, much more active than Jokowi in foreign policy. But all the indications and foreign policy experts said that Prabowo will. Jokowi and Prabowo. Yeah. Prabowo will continue the Indonesian pragmatic foreign policy. Not completely siding with China or the US. Like, for instance, he visited China recently, but also made a stop in Japan, just to show, no, I'm not like completely pro-China.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Certainly something to look out for when he comes in. Okay, over to you, Elizabeth.
Good morning. Thank you for that presentation. It was rather depressing in parts, but it's the real world in Indonesia. I'm from the International Commission of Jurists, and we're very concerned with rule of law issues and also human rights violations in Indonesia. My question's about the role of the military. Now, Prabowo has already foreshadowed a bill on military businesses. He's also foreshadowed that he wants an increase of military numbers within each kabupaten. Do you see that there could be an increased role for the security forces under Prabowo's presidency?
You okay with that?
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. And with the new law, which some people say it will bring back the Dui Fungsi, because now the new civil the civil servant law, right? So which basically and even before that law, former even some of the active generals and also police officers also were able to become the interim regional heads. So it's already showing the signs that and Prabowo kept saying that he wanted more role for the military and also some of his closest allies. So people are already speculating about who is going to be in his cabinet ministers, and some of the names that kept coming up. Although we can't really know before the appointment has been confirmed. But there are some former military generals and some of his close allies as well kept coming up in this list. And of course, don't forget the defense minister, because surely that's the one ministry that Gerindra will insist on getting. and military businesses will keep growing, I believe, because already they were involved. I mean, the defense ministry was responsible for the food estate, and which, there's not much correlation between growing cassava and army skills, but it was. It was one of the ways in which Prabowo tried to leverage his position to kind of build up his power and his material base for the election. So, and another question will be, what if there is another flare-up in Papua? How is he going to respond to that? I think we can expect that it will be worse. Jokowi was already worse than people expected initially. People expected him to be this democrat, human rights defender, but he's look at what he's done in Papua. It wasn't. There were still a lot of problems going on, and I don't know. I imagine Prabowo will be worse. So unfortunately.
Thanks, Navhat. Thanks so much. Okay, we have a question up the back here and a question down the front here. And while people are asking questions, if the people standing would like to come and scuttle around the front, that's fine with us, so you can grab a seat. But over to you up the back. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Michael Collins. I'm from a consulting company called Strategic Development Group. Thank you, Navhat. That was fantastic. I'm really struck that you just gave an incredibly interesting, comprehensive presentation that included illiberalism and dynasties, secularism, and you didn't use the M word once, Megawati. Can I ask about the role of PDIP and Megawati in everything you've described? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. What's the role of Megawati? I mean, the obvious thing is that there was that big fallout between PDIP, Jokowi and Jokowi. And so that explained why Jokowi shifted his support from Ganjar, who was the PDIP's candidate, to Prabowo. But if we are to believe, the news, the recent news from Tempo, for example, that Jokowi is already extending an olive branch to PDIP. For example, he's trying to negotiate for BG, to become the head of the intelligence agency, who is close associate of Megawati, the head of PDIP. But again, in the public statement, PDIP recently said that they're not going to join the government, but they're not going to be opposition either. So the word that they use is, we're going to support the government from outside. I'm not sure what that means. But people kept speculating that if there is the showdown between Prabowo and Jokowi is really happening, then Megawati and PDIP will be more clearly shifting to Prabowo's side. So I think a lot of these things remain to be seen, but that's what makes it really exciting.
Indonesia is always exciting, isn't it? So just time for one last question down the front here for Luke. I'm sorry to those of you who had your hand up and we didn't have time to get to.
Thank you. Can I just, Professor Luke Nottage from the law school, can I ask about the new government's likely policy on foreign investment? Because one aspect that you mentioned is the Omnibus Act, which is now finally coming into effect after a constitutional court challenge, but what's the new government? Is the new government happy with that and going to be enforcing that? And the second aspect you mentioned was the downstreaming and resource nationalism and the ban on export of nickel and now bauxite. And with nickel smelting, almost all the investments come from China because Western investors are thinking, well, the carbon and environmental impact's not good, and corruption and other issues, and will this ban even last, because the EU complained successfully in front of the WTO panel, but the ruling's not enforceable. So, but yet the new government is maybe not quite so pro-China. I don't know. Is that going to be an impact on this downstreaming part, the foreign investment application?
Thank you. I'm sorry, it's really not my field at all, so I cannot really give you a complete answer. But I think it's safe to say that the conservative estimate is that Prabowo will continue the omnibus law. I don't think he's gonna abolish it. And some of the people, some of the experts in the field already said that he will continue Indonesia's pragmatic policies in terms of attracting foreign investment. But as for the details, I'm sorry, it's really not my fault. Thank you.
We do have Indonesian nickel experts in the room, Luke, so if you'd like me to point them out to you, I can do that later. But for now, it's time to wrap up, so please join me in thanking Navhat for a fantastic Indonesia update. Congratulations, Navhat, thank you. What a great way to start.